Do you know anything about people having kids younger? Like, how old are you?
I'm 27, so this will be my first kid. Literally, like, all of my friends are getting married and having kids right now, which is anecdotal evidence, obviously. It doesn't speak to mass data and polling across our entire country.
Yeah.
But I do think we're going to see a huge pendulum swing in that direction, namely because everybody is screaming at young women in particular, do not get married and never, ever, ever have children. Right before the election, the Los Angeles Times ran a headline where the headline actually said it is almost shameful to want to have children. And they were making the argument for this from the climate change perspective and overpopulation, which is the biggest hoax of all time. We are wildly underpopulated, actually. In over 150 countries in the world, we have a fertility rate less than 2.1. So we actually can't reproduce to fill our own population back up again. But you've seen this narrative everywhere, from podcasts, from influencers, from celebrities, from the entertainment industry. I mean, it's just everywhere. And I think ultimately you're looking at this whole generation of people who have been on the dating apps for years and years and years. They've been engaging in casual hookup culture for years and years and years. They're reading Cosmopolitan magazine headlines that tell them it's super fun to cheat on your husband and that's going to bring the spark back into your marriage. Real headlines, actually.
It'll bring a spark back in.
Something.
I don't know if it's the kind of spark you want.
Things are. We're miserable and depressed and fat on birth control and have no sex drive, and that's becoming incredibly normal. And we're lonely. I mean, literally every mental health problem that our generation is facing is ultimately based in extreme isolation and loneliness, contributing to this anxiety and depression. Interestingly, the CDC said in 2021, 1 in 3 teenage girls in America seriously contemplated taking her own life, which was shocking. Well over 33% of teenage girls. And that bucked the trend from the last several decades, where most of the crises, particularly with mental health, you've been seeing with young women were groupthink mentality. It was cluster suicides and cluster eating disorders, and whole groups of friends would be doing these things. And now it's all based in a profound isolation from one another and loneliness, where an individual says, the world would be better without me. So I think we're kind of returning to our roots, especially as women. And we're very relational, intimate creatures. We're very empathetic to one another. So we naturally seek out relationships with one another. And we're asking, well, what's missing? Largely, what's missing is marriage and parenthood. And we've seen the lowest marriage rate in American history these past few years in the United States since we began recording those rates in the 1860s. And we are facing a 100-year fertility low in the United States in 2024, going into 2025.
Really?
Not because people can't have kids, although that's certainly an alarming problem that we need to face, but because people just are choosing not to have them. And then we look around and say, well, if that's the case and we're all miserable, maybe we're missing something when it comes to traditional values and marriage and family again.
Yeah. Wow. That's nice, though. I know when I had my daughter, I was 24 or 25? Anyway, late 24, early 25, something like that. And the people in my neighborhood who had kids were 35. Like, there was nobody in Toronto that had kids that was under 35. It was like, if you're not in your late 30s, then what are you doing? Where's your career? What have you done with your life?
Yeah.
Like, I got asked, the number of times I got asked with a newborn baby or super pregnant, what is it you do? Like, and it was what is it you do? Like, with disgust from, I think, to put it bluntly, childless older women who were angry. It was like, what is it you do? And I was like, well, I'm, about to give birth right now. So that's like what I'm doing right now. Actually. Yeah. But it was pretty brutal. So and then I traveled to other countries, and usually these were not first world countries. And the number of people who were in their mid-20s who had kids and looked happy and there was like more of a community element. There were restaurants. I couldn't believe this. There were restaurants you could go to, and most of the restaurants would have someone there to watch kids, or a little daycare room.
Wow.
And I was like, so there were people hanging out with their kind of little kids running around with their friends, and it was totally normal. And I was like, wow, we're so isolated. It's so isolating. This was like 7 years ago to have a kid. It was like, it just destroys women. They're at home alone with a baby. Like, no wonder everyone's scared about it. But if they weren't isolated, if it wasn't like this one-off person having a kid away from all their extended family with
their
like
friends, and
then it'd be so much better. So it's really nice to hear that there's a swing back. Plus, it makes sense.
Community.
Like otherwise, women don't have kids, and that's
that's exactly what we saw with millennials. Actually, I read something the other day that 70% of millennials in a recent survey said they would rather have pets than kids because it's easier. It doesn't ruin their lifestyle. It doesn't ruin their corporate aspirations.
That's what we were taught. Like,
and that was easier.
We were taught that from celebrities too. And I think now you're seeing a little bit more of the like Hollywood celebrity having children.
Yep.
Which is
huge
nice.
Baby boom this last year.
Nobody had kids when I was a teenager. And I'm talking about like 35-year-olds. Now they are. Like you see some people who are like, it's like, oh, they're having a baby. How old are they? 42. I was like, okay. So we just like skipped the millennials.
Pretty much. Yeah. And honestly, I always found that so demeaning, especially now that I'm pregnant, I'm working full time and I'm traveling a lot still for my job and everything. Yeah, it hasn't been easy. And there are some days that it's really, really hard. But I always found it so ironically anti-feminist.
Oh yeah.
This message that we're telling women that your whole career will die. You'll never get a promotion. You'll never have friends. You'll never go on a vacation ever again if you have children, to the point that a lot of these large Fortune 500 companies would literally rather pay out of pocket for you to go to another state to get an abortion than to give you better maternity leave, for example. Always blew my mind. I genuinely could never wrap my head around something like that, because literally you're just telling women you're not good enough. You're not capable of this. Your life is over the minute you decide to bring more love and more purpose and a worth to your identity. You're just a worker bee. You're a salary to us. And make no mistake, they would replace you tomorrow if something happened or you died or whatever. You're literally just a number to them. But we call that empowerment and feminism. That's always baffled me.
That's so funny. I hadn't thought about that specifically, but definitely growing up, what I learned was, now luckily I had my dad as a dad. So I had some mixed messages there, because it was like, marriage is super important. You should have kids young, but also you need a PhD. And I remember being 17, being like, how many years does it take?
That's a lot.
to get a PhD, and then, but I'm supposed to have a baby young, and then how does this work? Anyway, it worked out. I don't have a PhD, but it worked out anyway. So at least I had my dad being like, no, kids are good. Kids are good. Kids are good. But, and then my friends that would come over, he'd tell them that too. Not that he was sitting everyone down being like, have children. But
yeah, what was that like bringing friends home to your dad and him talking about that stuff?
I think, so it depended on the friend. If it was like, I went to a public school, some of my friends were in trouble. So if it was a troubled friend, then it was a stern talking to. It was really only close friends that got the like, what are you doing with your life? What's
advice.
Your plan? Like, when are you going to get married? This kind of conversation. So that didn't happen to very many people around. It definitely happened to my best friend, because she was around all the time, and we like got into hordes of trouble and things. So he'd sit us down all the time and be like, what are you doing with your life? What's your plan? You know, this woke stuff's bad. She was like, my best friend was at Concordia, and she was in sociology, but it was sociology with a minor in gender studies, something like that. I'm telling you, I was in the trenches. I was in psychology, but everyone I knew was in gender studies. And I just remember so we didn't get along very well, to be blunt, because I was just like, this is so infuriatingly stupid. Like, you can't just use all these manipulative sentences to describe an idea to me without the underlying being stupid. Like, you can't just cover it in word salad and be like, it's smart. That's not what makes something smart.
No.
Yeah. So anyway, I left that university because I was just like, if I hear more of this, I'm going to hit somebody. Like, I got to get out of here. But she survived that.
Wow.
She failed a class. I hope she's okay with me talking about this. I won't name her though. But she failed a class called Men and Masculinity.
Oh no.
Because the professor wanted her to write an essay that was basically like why men and masculinity is bad. And she didn't want to write it because she has a good relationship with her dad and things, and like was an anti-man. So she wrote an argument to it.
Which is smart. It's academia, right? You'd think.
They failed her. So she went to the person above the professor and said, hey, I wrote this. Like, I'm handing it in. What's going on? But they failed her anyway. That was the only class that she failed, was Men and Masculinity, for writing an essay that was an anti-man.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah, I like left Montreal after that. I was like, this is so, I can't believe they're charging me money for this. Like, how dare they charge me money for this? And nobody around me, there were maybe one or two people that were like, yeah, you know, Mikhaila, argue on Facebook with these people. But they're like, there wasn't a group. There weren't conservatives. It was just entrenched. It was like, guess I'll go to the sciences because it's not as bad there.
Yeah. It wasn't at the time anyway. You know, I love that story because I feel like there are probably students on every college campus in the West that could tell you exactly the same story about that paper. And people wonder why young men gave the middle finger to the left and said, yeah, we're not subscribing to this anymore. Everybody's shocked and amazed by that. And I'm thinking, you've spent the last decade trying to program like a robot every single person under the age of 45 to think men evil, eat all men. And now you're surprised that the next group of young men is saying, we don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
It's crazy.